Welcome everyone to Zoom Palestine on the last weekend of October, and I invite you all to relax, take a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you're drinking. We have some really dynamite reporting for you today. It's been a very active week, so we'll start out with a few minutes of Palestinian music, as we usually do. I have a virtual background of the Palestinian flag, so my head might be looking a little weird, but that's why it's acting up this way. I'm going to turn around my screen for our Facebook friends who will be coming on, and let me do a screen share with us, and we will listen to some Palestinian music to begin the day. If I can find it. All right, let me go off again and get our music going for us. Here we go.
على عهدي على ديني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني على ديني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني
welcome. That's certainly a
Hello, I'm Mike Tucker.
Rousing way to start our session, and I welcome everyone, and I invite you to this session, which is going to be full of really interesting and very important information for us to know. And I welcome Nina Allen from Brooklyn Voice for Peace.
Hi.
And Saqib Gada on Facebook Live. So while we're waiting for people to come on, we're going to play this beautiful video of Mahmoud Darwish to inspire us. From songs and pictures from Palestine. From a Palestinian poet, Mahmoud Darwish. We have on this land that which makes life worth living. We have on this land that which makes life worth living.
ما يستحق الحياة.
April
على هذه الأرض ما يستحق الحياة.
The aroma of bread at dawn.
تردد إبريل.
A woman's beseeching of men.
رائحة الخبز في الفجر.
The writings of Aeschylus.
تعويذة امرأة برجال. كتابات أسخيليوس.
Moss on a stone.
أول الحب.
Mother standing.
عشب على حجر.
And the invaders.
أمهات يقفن على خيط نايم وخوف الغزاة إلى الذكريات.
We have on this land that
على هذه الأرض لا يستحق
September's end.
نهاية أيلول.
A woman leaves
سيدة
behind
تترك 40 بكامل مشمشها.
with all of her apricots.
ساعة الشمس في السجن.
The hour of sunlight is
غيم يقلد سربا من الكائنات.
a cloud reflecting a swarm.
هتافات شعب لمن يصعدون إلى حتفهم باسمين وخوف الطغاة
Some people's
من
applause for those
الفتيات.
who face their own erasure.
على هذه الأرض ما يستحق
And the
الحياة.
tyrant's fear of songs.
على هذه الأرض سيدة
On
الأرض.
this land, all that makes life.
أم البدايات. أم النهايات.
On this land,
كانت تسمى
the lady of our land, the mother of all beginnings,
صارت تسمى
and the mother of all ends.
سيدتي.
It's called that.
أستحق لأنك سيدتي.
The name
أستحق الحياة.
It was very moving. Having just returned from Palestine, I can further understand Darwish's poetry because of the amazing resilience that I found in the Palestinian people. That was truly astonishing. Their resilience, their commitment to remaining on the land and retaining their identity, for me was not only inspiring, but almost unimaginable how they could do it. it really, for me, was a great question of wondering what the Palestinians have that's so very special. Under the worst circumstances you can imagine, living under this military occupation, constantly fearful of death, of imprisonment, of torture, of losing water, electricity, their land, their homes, they still laugh and celebrate life. They make jokes. They are cheerful. They are friendly. They're polite. I had so many Arab men helping me getting through checkpoints and at the airport. And I mean, they were just wonderful. And I was thinking, you know, how do they maintain their spirit? It's truly astonishing. I think part of it is because they have a very strong community and a very strong tradition. And they're very connected to their family and to their land. So it's that connection, that dual strength of connecting with people you love and connecting with the land that you love. I think that's what gives them the strength that they have. I came back even more awed than ever by Palestinian culture and their struggle. So we're going to start our event today by looking at what the electronic intifada has been what news the electronic intifada has for us today. It's always a little depressing, but there's some good news today as well. So we will share us again. And before we begin our interview, Nina, we always go over current events update that's gone on this week. I haven't done this for 2 weeks because I just got back from Jordan and I could hardly stay awake past 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was jet lag, and the older I get, the worse part of jet lag is. But anyhow, so here's our electronic intifada, and we'll see what's going on. And one of the articles is about a new spirit of resistance that we've certainly seen in Palestine with all the events going on. And Israel is in denial of these events, but evidently the Palestinian people are no longer silent victims, but are starting to resist in many, many ways. I think the shooting of Shireen Abu Fata really was a trigger where finally they said, as in Yiddish, you say genig, which means enough, that they finally had enough, and now they're starting to openly resist. Some of that resistance is violent, some is nonviolent, but there's definitely been many new events, and we'll look at review a few of the events that the article is going to be talking about. They say for huge numbers of Palestinian, Udal Tamimi is a role model. He was killed defending his homeland and dignity of his people. He was shot dead in October near a Jerusalem refugee camp. And then there were other soldiers on the scene. None managed to capture or kill him. He was a leader of resistance, and he remained at large for 11 days. And the refugee camp, Shuafat, was closed down with searches, but they couldn't get him. And so it was very interesting that he escaped capture, and finally it took them 11 days. So his story can be placed within a larger context. Over the past 4 months, the situation in the West Bank has changed rapidly. The new developed, people found a new strength. Every day, Palestinians undertake some act of resistance or protest against Israeli occupation. The driving force in the resistance are young people who did not take part of the first or second Intifada. Udal Tamimi was just 22, and Ibrahim al-Nabusi was killed by the Israeli army was born in 2003. So while they're not conscious of the horrors of the time, they grew up listening to the histories and experiencing oppression on a daily basis with constant daily humiliations and abuse. They grew up with the wall already up on them. And then when Israel started attacking worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque, that was a big trigger for many people who felt that Israel had crossed the red line, allowing the settlers and the religious fanatics to invade the Al-Aqsa Mosque with very little, with support and backing of the soldiers of the IDF. So this act of desecration was among numerous crimes committed by Israel in Jerusalem, a city it is actively colonizing. So outrage at these and other obscenities have filled Palestine's young fighters with a revolutionary fervor. So the resistance now occurring in the West Bank does not appear to have been planned by the leaders. The leaders of the PA are totally outside of any of this. And also they're not associated with any of the major factions of Palestine, Hamas, Hezbollah, none of them. It's on their own. A group called the Lion's Den has claimed responsibility. This is a group has members of all Palestinian factions. It's based in Nablus, and it represents a new sense of cooperation among young Palestinians, a cooperation that does not rely on traditional factions. And part of the problem for the Palestinians is that these traditional factions would not cooperate with each other. But these young kids said, no, that's not the way to do it. We have to stay together. So that's and so they're very defiant, and they are really doing a great deal to strengthen many people who may be fearful of resisting or are willing to go along with the occupation. So another article that we can look at, if I can get my screen back on, is the, and this is good news. Most of the time it's just bad news, but this is very interesting. What's been going on in England, and Rishi Sunak is now the new prime minister. He's Indian, a wealthy Indian. So many people are suspicious of him. How does he represent ordinary people? But he may quietly drop the embassy move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So that's news. I wasn't aware of that fact. So let's keep a watch out for that. And we're talking about the strategy for liberation, that nonviolence is being combined with what they call acceptable resistance. But the real violence is the settlers, who are violent and dangerous, and I experienced that over the summer, having almost been run over by a settler car in Joubran. So throwing rocks. Hi, Eugene, nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. Welcome. Eugene is a wonderful poet who has produced some very interesting poems about Palestine. We're going to have another poetry session soon, Eugene, so get your pen out and write some fresh stuff for us, okay? And I just did actually a work of art that involves a wonderful quote that I did like a collage thing, and the artwork says, here, I'll show you. The artwork says, fight a gun with a pen. Fight a gun with a pen. I don't know if you can see it. With my virtual background, it's going to be a little hard. Let me see if I have it here. No, you can't see it. The people on Facebook Live can see it. So anyhow, so that collage was saying, fight a gun with a pen. And other articles talk about a growing risk of nuclear Armageddon is going on with what's going on in Ukraine. And thousands of Palestinians are killed in thousands more Palestinians killed in the Israeli attack. Problems with people with disabilities pushed by his margins as the blockade goes on. And we're going to watch this podcast, if we have time at the end of the show, about Katie Halper fired over her criticism of Israel. Another journalist who loses their job because of their talking about the forbidden topic of Israel. So now we're going to invite Nina, our guest for today, to talk about the UN report that came out this week. And thank you, Nina, for bringing this to my attention because I missed it. There's so much going on in the news, and sometimes the news gets so depressing, I stopped watching it for mental health. So Nina's sent us a heads up on this UN report, this latest UN report. So I want to welcome Nina to Zoom Palestine. We have a few people on Facebook Live, and then I turn this into a YouTube, and then I post it for people to watch when they can, because not everybody can be on live. And I just want to make sure that the recording is going, because sometimes I screw that up. I'm pretty sure the recording is on. Okay, so Nina, you're with Brooklyn for Peace. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Brooklyn for Peace first? Because that's a very important part of the what's going on about supporting Palestine particularly in the New York area. Nina, what you want to tell people about Brooklyn for Peace and then how you got involved with it?
Okay, I am not the expert on Brooklyn for Peace because I moved here to Brooklyn in August. I had been living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I reached out to Brooklyn for Peace because I was active in Cambridge, specifically on the issue of Israel-Palestine with Mass Peace Action. So in essence, I have been a member of Brooklyn for Peace for about less than a month. But what I do know about them is they are an advocacy group on a number of different peace issues, not just on Israel-Palestine, but on the war in Ukraine in particular. They're very active with that right now. And they hold forums, they have Zoom meetings, and they meet with representatives in their areas. And overall, they are an advocacy and educational group. And I think they're very important because we really need a strong peace movement in this country. And it's like pulling teeth right now in terms of getting people concerned about what's foreign policy, about Israel-Palestine, about the war in Ukraine and the possible very dire consequences that are certainly possible. Hopefully it won't come to pass. And I think Brooklyn for Peace their work is very important.
I might add, I got involved with Brooklyn for Peace through being in Jordan, where I'm Tom Cox, who is an artist who was participating in an art symposium. And he was the only other artist, American artist in the group. There's a large group of 60 international artists and only 2 Americans, me and Tom. And he gave me the heads up about it. He's the leader of it, along with Charlotte. And I was so impressed, even though I don't live in Brooklyn, but I'm in Brooklyn a lot because my grandkids are there, my daughter and son live there. I was born in Brooklyn, so I feel entitled to be part of Brooklyn for Peace. But I was so impressed. Also, they do book groups, which I found very interesting. And there's all kinds of wacky diversity of opinions. I mean, everybody is not, what I like about Brooklyn for Peace is it tolerates people who really totally disagree with each other. Um, and the book groups are a great place for this kind of exchange. And I think that's very healthy for any group where one size doesn't fit all. That is diversity. And also, the other thing that's good is it connects it with many other groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, Code Pink, all the other wonderful peace groups. So they are not, just independent doing their thing, but they connect. So, Mina, tell us. So welcome to Brooklyn from Cambridge. I spent time in Cambridge myself, and I loved it. But Brooklyn's a good place to be. It's a very cool place. So I'm sure you're enjoying it. But let me ask you, how did you find out about this UN report, and can you fill us in on why it's so important?
I saw it on the internet. I consulted a lot of different publications. I saw it on the internet, and I thought, this has not been publicized. This is an extremely important report. And as far as I know, none of the major newspapers have covered it at all. In fact, the report was issued in September at a session of the UN. Yeah. So it's just coming out now, a month later. People are not aware of it, but I think it is important. What it does, the primary thing it does is it extends the category of apartheid. Apartheid does not sufficiently describe the Israel-Palestine situation. It reframes that description in terms of settler colonialism. It adds a kind of, it complements, or apartheid, the label apartheid complements the designation of settler colonialism. And what that basically means is Israel is inhabiting Palestinian land. The author of the report goes back to the 1947 partition of Israel, where land that was inhabited by Palestinians for a millennium was turned over in that proposal, the 1947 partition proposal. Land was turned over to European Jews. And basically what the report says is Palestinian natives had been living on that land for a millennium. It is not Israeli land. And that basically is the basis of the report, that the occupation is illegal, that there is no point in returning to peace negotiations, a la the ones they had over the years. We all know about that. I think the last one was with John Kerry. It failed. Israel didn't intend to negotiate a two-state solution. And so that basically what the report says is the international community needs to recognize international law. International law deems that the land belongs to the Palestinians. And in particular, the report is calling for an independent state for Palestinians on the occupied territories. And to me, that's very interesting, because you will remember that several years ago, there was this huge debate about one state or two state solution. And I think the people who were considered most progressive said, oh no, the Palestinians it has to be a one state solution. Palestinians will not get a fair deal. The settlers will never leave if we talk about a two-state solution. But here on the UN, it's very clear. Palestinians basically deserve the right of self-determination. that is the basis of a two-state solution. Palestinians deserve self-determination, and they should acquire through international law what is now considered the occupied territories, which I assume is, we're talking about East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. That would be the nature of the Palestinian state, and it would include reparations.
Wow.
So also that was mentioned.
That's
so
great.
It would be up to the international community to bring this about. Of course, it does not say exactly how this is going to be accomplished, because that's a very difficult issue. But I think that's right. I think that the international community must step in. We're a long way from there in the United States, but Ireland is moving, certainly ready to act. Yeah. And perhaps other states as well.
Other countries too.
Yes.
Extraordinary. For me, one of the things you said in the very beginning, it's a big question when you say that the land is basically Palestinian for millennia, and that the UN recognizes that. Does that delegitimize the state of Israel itself?
That I wondered. I think that is an outstanding question. There was nothing mentioned about that. So, I mean, the assumption is, well, Israel's there. I don't know what the assumption is, but that question was not answered.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. And plus also, what are you going to do with all those settlers? There's over 1 million settlers now in the West Bank. I was just reading an article in Haaretz, which was where the far right are congratulating themselves because they've surpassed the 1 million mark of settlers now in what they call Judea and Samaria, which is basically the West Bank. The second question that I think is very important, drawing from what you just told us, has to do with BDS. If that the UN has declared officially that the Israeli occupation is illegal, then BDS should no longer be treated as a criminal enterprise in many states. So I think this has profound impact on the whole issue of BDS. And I'm very committed to the nonviolent use of economic tactics, because that's how Gandhi operated, and that's how South Africa ended apartheid, how Gandhi got the British out of India. I think that economic tactics as a form of nonviolent pressure is extremely important, particularly for Israel. So if BDS can really continue to flourish and expand to include things like weapons, we have some hope. So I think legally now those who are in the courts now over BDS have a new arrow in their quiver of arrows to legitimize them, because they've been so delegitimized and demonized, basically. So those are my comments, but I
think the issue of BDS in the courts is it's free speech.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's expression of free speech. If corporations can spend money in elections and it's considered free speech, by the same token, people should be able to boycott Israel as an expression of their speech.
But we know that logic has little to do with it when it comes to...
Of course. Unfortunately. In any event, I think that it's going to be, every little bit moves the needle. And I think it's really important that the UN reframe this and broadened basically what we know is already happening there, but will not be acknowledged. In this country, using the word apartheid is enough to almost have you thrown out of the Congress. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but
and with the death threats that the congressmen, the four congresswomen are receiving, I saw Ilhan Omar on last night, and it's so serious. I never realized how really dangerous it is.
Serious.
And the Israeli lobby is pushing this against them big time. So if anything happens to any of them, the Israeli lobby will have a lot to do with it. It's a time in our history that, if somebody told me this would be happening 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I would say, oh no, it could never be that way. But unfortunately, it is. So I think that what you hit on the head is Congress, is that we all need to send emails to our local representatives and tell them that this to read. Most of them don't even probably know about the UN apartheid declaration. So I think that this is something that perhaps we need to educate the UN and have articles in newspapers about it. And as you said, every bit moves the needle. I think I'm just going to make some flyers and put them around my building because this is something very important, certainly. And how do we bring this out into a hostile environment? It's not easy. And if it's hard for us in New York, it's worse in other parts of the country. So, Eugene, do you have any questions for Nina?
Just to say that it's been a really long time since we met in person, and I hope everything is well for you. And I don't know this woman. This is the first time I've met you, so hello to you as well. Okay. My thoughts are this, and of course, one can always agree or disagree. And that is, we're living in a super distracted environment. And that could be something that plays a part in the fact that there's very little focus on the plight of Palestinians. The other factor I want to put into this is that I don't believe that the United States is a true nation. I believe it is still a colony and that it has a colonial mindset. And as such, it is a big factor in the way it perceives the rest of the world. And that is why the United States never had a comprehensive foreign policy with regard to the Middle East, Africa, parts of Asia, and Latin America. And for that reason, things like exploitation will persist. So what I'm talking about are things that would require enormous effort to change. I'm not that optimistic about that because this mindset, a colonial mindset, is so entrenched. I really don't see that much true movement towards a system of justice for anyone, whether it be Palestinians or Armenians or any of the other past groups that have been marginalized and exploited. So with that being said, the only thing that we can do now is to to provide some kind of humanitarian assistance, of which some is trickling throughout the world. And those are just some of my thoughts about this subject. And it continues to weigh on my mind as to the real issues, which often get pushed aside for other things, perhaps of more immediate concern, like taxes and social programs and all of the things like that.
Prices.
Exactly. This is what I'm referring to as the super distracted environment that all of us are living in. And it's
Eugene, when you mean when you mean colonial mentality, I presume you mean the belief that white European supremacy over indigenous peoples, over Latinos, over Blacks, over so that the power structures now still have the colonial attitude.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah, and this is now interesting that you identify this, because this is the problem with Israel.
It's another colony, basically.
They have the same mentality.
Exactly.
The Israelis have the same mentality of superiority over them. And I was thinking of this yesterday, and if I say this here, please don't jump down my throat. And I'll probably, people who watch this will probably, go crazy, but it was kind of a weird analogy. Not believe they were a master race, right? And not all Jews believe this, but in Judaism is the strain of the Jews are also a master race because they're a chosen people. And they got special treatment from God. And there's many things in the Talmud and practices that have been proclaim Jewish superiority over other people. Remember, we were on Zoom Palestine once we got Zoom bombed, and by some young Israeli crazies who were probably paid to do it. And one of the guys said, all you goyim, you're going to all be our slave of Jews one day. And I thought, this is the mentality of, unfortunately, a lot of Israelis also.
Yeah.
So, and that probably explains also the connection between America and Israel, American foreign policy and Israel, because they're both coming out of the same mentality.
Right.
Eugene, because that's a very insightful. What's always great is to ask the question why.
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking at events and items and things that are going on, it's so important as why are people acting the way they're acting? Why do they believe what they believe? And I think you hit it on the head with that we're still a colonial mentality. I think you're absolutely 100%. I never thought of that. But I think you're absolutely right. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Insight, Eugene. That was very, very important for us.
It's just that Europe, a very small part of the globe, has had such a profound effect on the rest of the world and the rest of humanity, and continues to have this profound effect during and after.
Yeah.
So we're talking about hundreds, perhaps even close to at least thousands of years. Yeah.
I think what happened was because, I was thinking, well, we can blame industrialism, but no, it started way before industrialism. And I think it goes back to Charlemagne taking over the role of the Holy Roman Emperor, because he decided he was going to be the new Roman Emperor and that Europe was going to be the new Rome. France was going to be the new Rome. So they had that same imperial attitude as Rome in the power structures of Europe. Now, while Charlemagne was very enlightened, it did many things that were very positive, like, libraries and books and things. He produced the state, that unified state, based on Roman imperial aspirations, which were basically colonial. We conquer you, and then you have to do what we say. So that's very interesting. Yeah. It's certainly something that goes way back thousands of years in Europe.
It's just bad karma.
Eugene, I had a question. Do you distinguish between colonialism and imperialism, or are you conflating those two terms?
Well, I probably am conflating them, but I'm sure there's a difference. But I'm not sure on, both of them have the same underlying functions of superiority. The power structure, the people in power feel they're superior. The Romans felt they were superior over the Gauls. I think that it's that attitude of feeling superior gives you permission to conquer Africa, to
the justification for what's being done.
So if you could enlighten us about more distinction between imperialism and colonialism, I'd be interested in that issue. I never really thought about it deeply, Nina.
Well, it's something that I think I haven't thought about until Eugene raised the issue of colonialism. And most people that I'm aware of tend to use the word imperialism rather than colonialism. So I think there's probably a distinction there. I think it's interesting to apply the word colonialism, but there probably is some kind of distinction between imperialism and colonialism. And then there is this phrase, American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
And that basically is part of what I think Eugene would call colonialism, that we are uniquely qualified to tell the rest of the world what to do.
Well, another word is hegemony.
Hegemony is another word, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, these are these words. There are distinctions. I think maybe colonialism, well, I have to think about it more. There are distinctions, and I'm wondering what they are. I probably there is some material on this, but it's a question that is important in some respects. And
I do think that there are distinctions, but they are by nature not mutually exclusive.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that imperialism, to me, I connect with more violent military conquests, ongoing, that just doesn't stop. Colonialism, to me, they conquer some places and then they kind of sit. I don't think the colonialism is as expansive as imperialism, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I think this is an interesting topic to talk about, guys. Let's talk about this, and let's do a program. I'm going to do some research on it, and let's see how this is, because I think this is important. Terminology is really important, and colonialism, I don't think, has the negative connotation that imperialism has. But I think this would be a really interesting topic to talk about in terms of Palestine. Is Israel being imperial? Is it imperialism? Most people call it colonialism. I'm not so sure. I think it is imperialism because they also want Jordan. They want from the Mediterranean to the Tigris-Euphrates River, part of Israel. There's when you listen to the far right talk, I mean, they're not just content with the West Bank. They want to extend power to include Jordan, all the countries between Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran all the way over to the Tigris Euphrates. They feel that was the land given to them by God, beach from the sea to the river. So that to me is real imperialism, because that's, military expansion. But I think this is a really interesting topic. I'd like to get a hold of Noah Chomsky and ask him what he thinks. We were both detained at the same time at the King Hussein Bridge in different rooms. I didn't know he was down the hall from me. I was interrogated 7 hours before they let me get over let me into Israel and the West Bank, Jerusalem. And he was being interrogated at the same time as me, but they never let him in. They kicked him out and sent him back to Jordan. So,
when was this?
This was in about 2009, 2010.
Okay.
He had a speaking engagement in the West Bank at Israel University. And when he went to the border, they said that Israel wanted him to go and speak at the university in Tel Aviv while he was there. And he said he couldn't do it because he had a schedule, and he said it wasn't scheduled. And also he boycotts, Israeli institutions. So they wouldn't let him in until he agreed to speak in Israel as well as in Palestine. And he refused to do it. So they sent him back to Jordan, and he did it by video from Jordan. And I think this is around 2010, maybe 2009, 2010, one of my first trips. The only reason I got in is I have Jewish relatives in Beersheba. And they finally, although they don't like me too much because we disagree politically, but finally, in order to get in, I said, look, I'm here to visit my relatives, blah, blah, blah. So finally they called my relative, and he said, yeah, she's not a terrorist, whatever. Although I think he really thinks I'm a terrorist, but so so it was, but that's a really fascinating thing to bring up, Eugene, and I think it's worth thinking about. So let's keep in touch about this, and anybody who's watching this, Sakib Gada on Facebook and a few other people, and people who see this in the YouTube video later, if you want to participate to this question, and maybe we'll do a little panel on it in the future, I think that would be really great. So Eugene, thank you so much. Nina, thank you so much. Now we're going to look at our another issue, which is very problematic, which is that when you are, and this is going to affect people who are going to start talking about this new apartheid, is what are people going to say about them? Nina, what do you think?
What are people going to say about including settler colonialism along with apartheid as a description of Israel's treatment of Palestinians? Is that your question?
Now, what are people going to say about activists who start talking about this apartheid in Israel, this UN, who are going to be trying to spread this information from the UN? What will people be saying?
Okay. I think
what
there's always yeah.
What will they be calling them?
I think there's always a problem with citing the UN as an authority on Israel-Palestine, because for so long we have heard that the UN is biased. UN is, I don't think they use the word anti-Semitic, but
there it is, it's anti-Semitic. So
they do use that.
A big problem for us in talking about that the label of anti-Semitism is very problematic for activists, that whenever you criticize Israel, you're called anti-Semitic. And so I have a little video podcast that we'll look at for a few minutes that discusses this very real problem, especially for those of us who are are going to be speaking out, sending letters, distributing flyers. We're going to be called anti-Semitic. So let's listen to Nora Barrow Friedman, who's a very wonderful journalist, did this podcast about with the sociologist and activist Cheryl Nestle about the impact that the new definition, the IHRAW, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, has had on Canadian activists, academics, and students. And it's also a problem in this country as well. It's been promoted by Israel and its lobby. The IHRA definition conflates criticism of Israel on the one hand with anti-Jewish bigotry on the other. It has become Israel's lobby key weapon in North America and Europe to enforce censorship about Israeli crimes against Palestinians. So let's watch this.
The implication of the implementation of the examples as anti-Semitism has really grave consequences, we feel, for freedom of speech.
The electronic intifada.
The electronic intifada.
The electronic intifada.
This is the Electronic Intifada podcast. I'm Nora Barrows Friedman.
And I'm Asa Winstanley.
Welcome back to the Electronic Intifada podcast. I'm Nora Barrows Friedman. Human rights defenders in Canada have released a report on the impact that suppression of speech regarding Palestine and Palestinian rights is having on activists, students, faculty, and organizations who continue to face sweeping reprisals, intimidation, and harassment campaigns. As our next guest writes, there is a connection to be made here between these attacks and efforts by pro-Israel advocacy groups to market the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, as we say, the IHRA, a document that has come under vigorous attack by defenders of academic freedom and Palestinian human rights. We're delighted to have Cheryl Nestle with us on the podcast today. She's a retired sociologist and a full-time activist. She's also one of the co-authors of the report entitled Unveiling the Chilly Climate, the Suppression of Speech on Palestine in Canada. The report is being released by Independent Jewish Voices Canada. Cheryl, thank you so much for being with us today on the Electronic Intifada podcast.
Thanks for having me, Nora. This is exciting.
Oh, good. Yes, we're excited to have you. We've reported for years on the escalating tactics suppression by Israel lobby groups who have been using the IHRA definition to silence and censor speech critical of Israel. Let's talk first about what the IHRA definition is to remind our listeners and viewers, and what compelled you and your co-author, Rowan Godet, to compile this detailed analysis of the impact that the IHRA has had already on Canada specifically.
Well, the IHRA has a very long and very sketchy history. For those who really want to dig deep, I highly recommend Ante Lerman's new book, Whatever Happened to Antisemitism, Redefinition and the Myth of the Collective Jew, which will give you every detail you ever wanted to know about the IHRA and its use and misuse. So just to give a very brief summary, the definition of anti-Semitism that is now known as the IHRA was developed in the early 2000s. It probably was kicked off because of the Durban anti-racism conference and allegations of anti-Semitism there. It's a very benign definition itself of just a few sentences. The problem arose when 11 examples of anti-Semitism were added to the definition. There's even a question as to whether there was an official adoption of the examples, but nonetheless, 7 out of the 11 examples involve criticism of Israel. So therefore, the push to adopt this definition, which has been very vigorous, universally around the world in institutions, by states, by civil organizations has been extremely aggressive. And the implication of the implementation of the examples as anti-Semitism has really grave consequences, we feel, for freedom of speech, for freedom of expression, for criticism of Israel. So the odd thing about it, the two places where it's been implemented with the greatest deleterious effects have been Germany and the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom actually mandated that every university in the country needed to pass the IHRA or have their funding rescinded. So they haven't actually made good on that threat completely, but the IHRA continues to be used to persecute Palestine activists on campus, for example, and in other places. And there have been examples of firings, etc. David Miller, who was a British academic who was just summarily fired from his job. And there are many, many, many examples in the UK. One of the things we do in the report is to try and give people who aren't familiar with what's going on an overview of how suppression is being experienced, mostly in Europe and in North America. So, the IHRA, while it purports to allow criticism of Israel, in actual practice, it doesn't do that. In actual practice, it does use criticism of Israel as, the way certain kinds of sentiments and expressions are evaluated as to whether or not they're anti-Semitism. So it's a very, the threat of the IHRA is sort of what we started out to document in our report. That was the original impetus for it, because Independent Jewish Voices Canada has one of the most successful campaigns in the world against the IHRA. We managed to get the Canadian Association of University Teachers to pass a unanimous resolution not for, to oppose the adoption on university campuses. 40 faculty associations in Canada have signed a pledge not to adopt the IHRA, and we've defeated it in several places in Canada, including very recently at a school board. So what we started out to look at was how are people experiencing not the IHRA being implemented, but the threat of it being implemented? Are people changing, particularly in academia, where I think it has some very far-reaching, it can have some very far-reaching effects. So we really concentrated on academia. So what we wanted to know is, are students not pursuing activism because they're afraid of the IHRA and afraid of being censured or accused of anti-Semitism? What are faculty doing? What is the content of their class syllabus? How is that responding to the threats of the IHRA? We eventually expanded it to include all kinds of harassment, suppression, silencing of speech, which I think was the right thing to do. But the IHRA still figures really prominently in the work that we did in terms of it being front of mind for a lot of people. It's like, I don't want to express pro-Palestinian sentiment or teach pro-Palestinian curricular material because I'm going to be accused of anti-Semitism, which could impact my career, which could make my life very difficult. As we saw from the testimonies, that is in fact what has happened.
I want to get back to that in a moment, just to talk about like the impact of just the threat of the imposition of the IHRA. But let's talk a little bit about how the IHRA has been promoted by Israel lobby groups. The proponents of the IHRA definition, both in Canada and here in the US, keep trying to make it about protecting Jewish students on campuses or making a so-called safe space for Israeli or Zionist identity, as though Zionism, which is a political ideology, was a personal identity with some sort of protected class status. And they say that the IHRA is not meant to threaten freedom of speech or freedom of expression, but it does just that. Can you talk about what basic rights are already being threatened and how further adoption of the definition would impact Palestine rights activism and advocacy?
So let me start with this question of Jewish student safety on campus, because it's something that I think about a lot. What we've seen, like in very recent history, are reports that are coming out, supposed research reports, about Jewish students feeling threatened on campus or experiencing anti-Semitism. I think if you look at almost every single one of them, with a few exceptions, they are methodologically basically intensive in terms of who they chose to interview, how they defined anti-Semitism. And I think the biggest, and to me, I'm really hoping our report is a kind of a counterpoint to this. And I think one of the important things to remember always, if you're reading these reports of Jewish lack of safety on campus, is that these are one-off incidents for the most part. They are often, and I don't want to defend them in any way, shape, or form, and I've certainly heard students talk about attacks that they've undergone that are anti-Semitic, and there's no excuse for that. Most of them are what you might call microaggressions, unless you start talking about pro-Palestine activism. So if a student says, when I see a Palestinian flag, this offends me, it scares me, it makes me feel unsafe, that's a lot different from having, your kippah, snatched off your head as you're walking on campus. It's a political expression. If you're fearful of it, I think you have to ask yourself why you're fearful of it. But to make a more important point, what we see in the report and from the interviews and from the data that we collected is that the attacks and the suppression and the harassment that is going on is part of a concerted project and effort. It's fun. I know it's always very dangerous to say this, but it's funded. We know that it's funded. We actually survey all the different organizations that were named by our respondents as being behind attacks that they suffered. And we know that there is an organized mechanism behind that. There is no such thing on the other side. There is no such thing on the pro-Palestinian side even though they sometimes claim there is, as a concerted, funded, well-coordinated campaign. There is no such thing. And I think many of the real anti-Semitic incidents are sort of one-off, again, indefensible, but they are individual. And if you want to define Palestine activism as anti-Semitic, then you're going to be able to document a whole bunch of things that I would disagree with their being categorized as anti-Semitic. So in terms of the threat of what the IHRA is doing, I kind of talked about it a bit before, but again, people, like, one of the things that's happening, one of the people I interviewed is an expert in Islamophobia. And she has been investigated by the federal funding agency for academic work, initiated by B'nai B'rith, inundated with Freedom of Information Act and requests for her emails and everything. And so that's the kind of thing that people are really fearing, that they will be investigated for the work that they do. There's so many things in the report that are disturbing. I mean, one of the things is that several of the academics we interviewed talked about how their work on Palestine that they had submitted to academic journals got lost. They were told it would be published, and when the journal or the book came out, was not there. They were given feedback about the work that was clearly coming from a Zionist perspective, and therefore would render the work, unpublishable in that journal. People talked about, academics, professors talked about giving up writing about Palestine because it was just too dangerous and too threatening to their career path. So there's a lot of people having to silence themselves. Several of them talked about being monitored and surveilled by Jewish students who belong to campus pro-Israel organizations, and then having what the professor said in class reported to the dean or to the university president, and then being called into the office to be, not necessarily chastised, but to discuss this. So people are very, very, and one of the people we interviewed said, this takes up so much time and energy that I don't have time to do the stuff I'm really supposed to do, like, meet with my students, discuss their work. So these are all, they're a waste of time in a lot of senses, but it's also happening. The surveillance is happening very frequently, and people have told us about it. So you walk into the classroom as a professor, and you have to, not that you don't do this anyway, watch every single word that you say when it comes to Palestine, Israel, and Jews. So where does that leave you? I mean, people told us that, certain, scholarly work like Patrick Wolf's work on settler colonialism, that they don't dare put it on the syllabus because it will be called out, even though this stuff is considered canonical, in the field in which it is situated. So to me, this is very scary from the knowledge production perspective, that there is if this succeeds, it's a very scary prospect. It means that, academic work on Palestine, with some exceptions, is going to be minimized, or, there'll be much less of it done than might be done otherwise. We found that there are two groups that are especially affected by this. One is pre-tenure and people on the job, people on the job market, who are afraid to even mention the word Palestine, anything they do in their CV or anything, for fear of being seen as, a threat. And the other, of course, is racialized and Muslim and Arab, and particularly Palestinian scholars. So, the quotes from our Palestinian scholars that we interviewed are the most heart-wrenching of all the quotes in the report, because they felt that their entire identities are erased. They're unable to talk about themselves as human beings, right? Because they would have to reveal, their histories and their traumas. And, the fact that they are being silenced is extremely painful. So I think this is borne out by, this is the only report of its kind. There's only one other thing that we found that was even similar, which was a study done of Middle East and North African scholars to ask about their work on the Middle East and how that has affected them. It was really uncanny because I found it late in the writing of the report, but found that so many of the responses that Laura Deeb and Jessica Winiger got were almost identical to what we got, even though they were not interviewing activists. They were only interviewing, run-of-the-mill scholars in that area. So you can imagine that when you're interviewing activists, you have a lot more of these awful stories. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the activists that you interviewed, and the differences between, students and faculty in academia dealing, especially the non-tenured ones dealing with having to self-censor, and then the more external facing, activists organizing for Palestinian rights, especially those of Palestinian or Arab descent. in the streets of Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver? What are the differences that you found, and how has just even the threat, besides the implementation of the IHRA, affected activism in Canada?
Well, I'll start with the students versus faculty. What we found is that the threats against students were much more violent than they were against faculty. So there were threats. The students who we interviewed reported threats of sexual violence, sexual slurs, homophobic utterances, which I found very, disturbing. Like, where does that even fit into this? I think it fits into the kind of the homophobic view of the Islamic world, that it's anti-liberal, etc. So if you are identified as a Muslim or a Palestinian or an Arab, you're seen to belong to a world that is not in sync, with modern values, etc. One of the things that students experienced more than faculty, although the faculty experienced it as well, was being disciplined by administration and being threatened by administration and being subject to administrative surveillance and shutting down, for example, of events. So one of the common things we find is that if a group like, SPHR organized an online campus activity, days before the activity is supposed to go on, they're told they have to come up with $3,000 for security. And of course, these groups have no money, so there's no way of doing this at all. So you either have to take the event off campus, which is, serious and difficult, but also disciplinary measures by university administrators and, being hauled into the dean's office and being lectured about, what a mess you're making of your life, et cetera, et cetera. So we have several of those.
We have a lot of that in the US too. I mean, that is a common story. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, these things are so parallel. Like, the events and incidents at Palestine legal documents and the European Legal Support Center document are, they're all very similar to what we've documented. And of course, in the report, there are two separate parts. There's the cataloging of the events. So we've cataloged both Europe as much as we could and Canada. And we see a growing number of events as the years, we start out in 2009. By the time you get to 2022, you've got a much longer list going on. So you've got one of the tactics that's used by the pro-Israel folks is, and particularly B'nai B'rith, is litigation. So I know in the States this is a big deal, and the legal attacks are very common. We started to see them here. Excuse me. Luckily, they've lost almost every single legal challenge, so that's great. But it doesn't stop them from engaging people. Having to organize defense and money, et cetera, in order not to be, on the wrong side of the legal decision. So you have that, but you have, a lot of it is just discursive and putting out slurs and slander and alarming articles and, calling people terrorists. And so there's a lot of that, and it's got much, much worse in the last few years. It's gotten really bad toward Jewish Palestine solidarity activists. So the Jewish community has really, got a bee in their bonnet about Jews who do this kind of work. And there have been some really, really toxic, the discourse has gotten very toxic around Jews who do this work, which is interesting. So, and we do have Jews in the report because we're a Jewish organization. Many of the people we interviewed were Jews, and they did not escape the attacks that others have also experienced. So that's, I'm trying to think what else. I mean, we have we have the cataloging of everything as much as we could possibly find and put in there. And then we have, the empirical data that we gathered from our respondents. So that's going to be two different things. What's happening, to one individual professor in one individual department is not necessarily what Simon Wiesenthal Center or the B'nai B'rith are putting on their website or going after. So, if somebody writes on your Palestine solidarity poster on your wall, on your door of your office, a slur of some sort, that's not going to make the news. But it's part of an ongoing, kind of pile up of harassing activities. So that's what we're trying to get at. It's like, what is people's experience of this that isn't necessarily public knowledge? And I think we really, managed to get a treasure trove, if you can call it that, of what's going on, under the surface, because it's pretty awful.
Yeah. As a sociologist, as someone who has studied this for a long time and has been in Palestine solidarity activism circles for decades, was there anything that surprised you when you and your co-author compiled this report and looked at the data?
There are a lot. There are several things that surprised me. I was surprised by the amount of administrative interference. I think one of the things some of your listeners may know about the Azarova case here at the University of Toronto, where Valentina Azarova was a legal scholar who did work on Palestine, who was hired to head the Human Rights Department of the University of Toronto Law School. And there was intervention on the part of a judge who was affiliated with the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs to try and get the law school not to hire her. It turned out there was the Canadian Association of University Teachers censured the University of Toronto. A lot of people refused to cooperate with the University of Toronto. It was a very strong measure that is very rarely taken. In any case, that level of interference is very public and very well known. But one of the things that we found was interference into hiring in other places, where sometimes Jewish students or Jewish faculty got together and said, we can't have this person who's identified as pro-Palestinian or as a Palestinian in our department because it would be a threat to us as Jews. And you have, of course, administrators paying attention to this and acting accordingly. So, while there have been battles in these places, it hasn't stopped anyone from unashamedly coming out and saying these things and trying to influence the hiring process on a basis that has nothing to do with the scholarship of the people involved. So you have that, which I think is very, very disturbing to me. I think the toxicity of some of it, it's something I've been thinking about for a while. The atmosphere has become extremely toxic around this. And of course, people who are Palestine solidarity activists or pro-Palestine are subject to all kinds of name calling, etc. Terrorist supporters. They seem to be unable to have a measured conversation about this topic without resorting to these characterizations, this kind of name calling. And it's, there's something, there's an atmosphere in general these days of toxic discourse. And it's certainly infiltrated the Israel-Palestine debate here, definitely.
Incredible.
So one of the things, and some of the threats of violence, I think, are very against the students. There were fewer against the faculty, but some of the things that have happened to students are really very, very disturbing. I think all of it is disturbing, to be honest with you. It's I'm more concerned about the whole issue of how do you bring the Palestinian narrative forward if you are going to be intimidated by the IHRA or by administrative intervention, or by, one of the things has not been settled in terms of the IHRA is what legal teeth it has. And there's a huge debate about that. So as of now in Canada, nobody has used the IHRA. It's been passed in several places, including Ontario, the province that I live in, but nobody has used it to do anything. So we're kind of waiting for that to happen so we can actually mount a legal challenge and question how it was that the IHRA was brought in. So it was brought in behind our backs. There was supposed to be a vote in the provincial legislature, and the day before the testimonies were to begin, they brought it in what's called an order in council. And this is a tactic that's happening. We're seeing it everywhere. It happened in several Canadian provinces, and I think it's happening in the States as well. You just bring it in. It's not a democratic process. It gets mandated, and there you go. That's right. But we still don't know. We don't know what legal validity, if any, it has.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was in 2019, the Trudeau administration announced that it would formally adopt the IHRA definition, containing it in their so-called strategy to combat racism and discrimination. And then Trudeau commissioned Erwin Cotler, who was like this longtime Israel lobbyist and strategist, to be like the anti-Semitism czar. I mean, how has, it was implemented in kind of this crazy way. And then of course, Doug Ford, the premier, pushed it in, as you said, without any democratic process. But how have people been pushing back against these attempts to codify it in Canadian law, either provincially or locally? And what can people here in the States or in Europe learn from those efforts?
Well, this is a really good question and an important question. When we first started to work against the IHRA in 2019, I think in January, we started our campaign. We were really out there on our own, independent Jewish voices. And we had, even though we tried to recruit, for example, Palestinian, Muslim, and Arab allies to help us put forward that this is a danger, because of the kinds of attacks that pro-Palestinian groups and individuals suffer. I think many of these groups were really afraid to stick their necks out around this, which is completely and totally understandable. As we moved along in trying to build campaigns, we did find allies. Eventually, we built coalitions of academics, Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim allies and Jews, who, for each of their own reasons, opposes the IHRA. Like we all, I mean, there are many reasons to oppose the IHRA, but working in coalition was absolutely the key to success. So we've had the success in academia is unprecedented. Nowhere else has this happened. And I think it's because it's so clear to academics that this is a violation of academic freedom and freedom of speech. And in terms of the racialized communities and the Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian groups, it's very, very clear that kind of, I won't call it legislation, that kind of policy is going to have a negative impact on their ability to speak out about Palestine, and even, the image of Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians, and in the post 9/11 era, which is they've all suffered tremendously. This is just kind of another slap in the face, because it says that things that you care about, that you think are important, we're going to suppress that because we don't think it's worth listening to, and it impinges on the rights of another group. So it's the pushback is difficult. It's slow. You have to meticulously build your coalitions and your relationships with allies. But for us, that has been the key, because we weren't able to move forward with this until we had built those coalitions. So that's the lesson that we've learned here. And of course, it's very productive and it's satisfying. And and as Jews, we know how important it is to lend, our credibility to those efforts, to spearhead those efforts, because, we want to protect is not the right word. We want to deflect these attacks from our allies and try and point out that these are valid criticisms. So, it isn't, we are often targets too. I've been harassed, et cetera, et cetera. I'm waiting any minute now for a case. I received a harassing email about a year ago from a guy out in British Columbia. He was foolish enough to leave his information on it. I found out he was a lawyer. I lodged a complaint with the British Columbia Law Society, which is like the what's it called in the States? The law.
The Bar Association.
Yeah. And he got convicted of this. He has to pay a big fine. So I mean, it's not the only thing I've about other incidents as well. It was very satisfying to do this. So, I mean, you have to push back in a million different ways. And of course, we are under-resourced in terms of this. Yeah. So I think we're punching way above our weight in terms of what we've managed to accomplish. But every time we call it's whack-a-mole. Every time you turn around, it's popping up somewhere and you have to immediately, organize to, we just had this at a school board. A school board was bringing up, and we didn't have a lot of time to get organized about it, but we organized a webinar. There were 3 Jewish speakers. And I think that had a huge impact. We translated it into Mandarin because so many of the people in this school board area are speakers of Mandarin, and we won. We won it. I was not expecting it at all. Totally not expecting it.
It's incredible.
It's good.
Good. Well, may many more victories for justice and freedom of speech follow in that path. Cheryl Nessel, where can people find the report? Is it at Independent Jewish Voices Canada?
It isn't yet. It will be next Wednesday, October 12th. If you go to our website again, you'll be able to download the report. It is 110 pages long with 220 footnotes, because when you do this kind of work, you got to get it right.
Yes. So, you have to be meticulous. Yeah.
Got to be meticulous. So we would love for people to read it, to circulate it, to give us comments. That would be great. And to replicate it, more importantly, to replicate it. And various organizations have decided to try and replicate it. So we're hoping that it'll have an impact.
Wonderful. Cheryl Nessel, you are a longtime activist, retired sociologist, and the co-author of this brand new report put out by Independent Jewish Voices Canada. It's called Unveiling the Chilly Climate, the Suppression of Speech on Palestine in Canada. And we'll put a link to ijvcanada.org up on the podcast blog post that accompanies this episode. Cheryl, thank you so much for all of your work and for being with us on the Electronic Intifada podcast.
Thank you, Nora.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on Donate Now. Thank you.
Wow, that was really interesting. I'm going to find that link to the report and post it. I have to also share that I've been a victim. I'm no longer getting my classes at NYIT because they complained about me doing this Zoom Palestine. I had been, so I suddenly, since that, I have not been getting any classes to teach for a couple of years. So it's definitely a danger to speak out. But I think that makes it even more important to speak out. So thank you so much, Nina, for your reporting And I'm going to put a link to the report from the UN also when I do the YouTube and send out the email. And I'm going to also ask for people who want to ponder the difference between colonialism and imperialism and how that could relate to our Palestinian issue. Because I think, Eugene, you raised a really important question in your comments. And so I'll be putting links to all the various reports and also to the IRHA definition as well. So thank you, everybody. We went a little over time, but I think it was important to listen to that interview. It was really awesome. And I have a cousin from my family, the only one in the family who agrees with me about Palestine. He's up in Montreal, so I have to send him a link to this because he may even be a member of the group. I'll have to check it out. So, salama, shalom, salam, and have a great week, everybody. Thank you so much. And,
before you close,
yeah,
I just want to quickly comment on the YouTube video that we just saw.
Yeah.
There are similar parallel currents going on in the United States. And there are there are many states that have enacted laws influenced by the Israel lobby to make employment conditional on the agreement that one who is applying for a job will not in the future ever criticize Israel.
Yeah.
Which means
And
essentially it criminalizes people who are looking for work who would have their freedom of speech curtailed.
Absolutely. And also they have institutions like schools, but even businesses cannot get contracts with the government if they, unless they sign pledges never to support BDS or any anti-Israeli activities. So this is pervasive. We did a program on all the last year on all the states, but there's been more legislation passed. So, it'd be good to do another program on the update of that because it's really horrific. You're absolutely right, Eugene. Absolutely. But in a way, because they're becoming more draconian about it, is because they're in more of a state of panic. So in a way, that the extra efforts now that Israel's making is because they're in a state of panic because they know that people are starting to question. So asking questions is an important thing, and then when we come up with some answers, then it's important for us to act. So I encourage everybody watching this program, watching the video, watching Facebook Live, find some small way this week, whether it's writing to your congressman or senator or putting up a sign somewhere or just having a conversation with someone about the situation. Because as Nina said, everything that moves the needle slowly is important. So thank you for helping move the needle.
Thank you, Jackie. Nice to meet you, Eugene.
Nice. Okay. See you next week, everybody. Masalam.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.